Hey YouTube, this is the fourth episode about living with the monks in Nepal, and so please remember that this video and all the other videos are being made for Ashley Oosthuizen, so like, subscribe, and share. Everything is for Ashley to get her out of Thai prison. And so the morning that I woke up, my first one at Adzom Monastery, it was Mr. Chou that showed me how to get from our rooms up to where the breakfast room was, which was situated right next to the main monastery, and it's where all of the head compos ate at. And inside of this room they all had their appointed places that was dictated by seniority, with the whole head compo of the entire monastery that was sitting at the end of the room, surrounded on three sides by these large windows on this very ornate cushioned sort of pagoda style chair in the lotus position. They all sat in the lotus position. But when you first walked in, on the left side there were two benches set up where the volunteers sat, and so it was Mr. Chou and his wife, and then for the first time I met an American named Wyatt who had been there for a few months already, so that was super cool. And there was also a Chinese woman that had the Anglican name of Fiona, and she was there as well teaching the little monks Mandarin. And so that first morning breakfast, when I was in there, obviously I saw Wyatt and he spoke English, and so I started picking his brain and asking him all sorts of things. Not at the beginning, because we were just sitting down to eat breakfast. And so actually at first what had happened is he was going to show me how to prepare this Tibetan food dish called Tsampa. And it looks like a flour for a bread, and it is. It's from a Tibetan high wheat. And so basically he was showing me how to go over there to where the food was all set up. All the food, of course, was vegetarian. There was no meat anywhere on the grounds. It wasn't even allowed in your room because, of course, in the Buddhist religion, to kill anything is considered a great sin. And so everything was always vegetarian. And Wyatt was telling me that this dish, specifically Tsampa, this superfood, was the only dish, the only food that actually kept him feeling full in between the meals, because all of the other food didn't really have the fat and the protein that he, being an American, was used to, and so he would get hungry rather quickly. And I found that I did as well, but the Tsampa was a huge help. And so he scooped like 4 of these spoonfuls of this flour into the bowl, and then proceeded to go to where the urns were, where they had sweet and unsweet milk tea, because they always have milk tea with all of their meals. It's a very Nepalese, Tibetan drink that you can find in all of the little shops. It's super yummy. It's made very strangely with coriander seeds and boiling milk and something. There's no tea in it actually at all, but that's what he would put inside of the bowl with the flour in it, and then mix that up a little bit to make these dough balls. And so I was just like, that's it, just flour and this milk tea. And then he added some honey, give it a little bit of sweetness, and then basically we went and sat down. And so we were sitting down there eating this first breakfast. We were going to eat the Tsampa first and then go back up and get some of the other things. They were like these fried, they looked like pancakes, but they were hollowed out in the center, but they were really yummy as well. There was all sorts of food that they had there. And so while I'm sitting there watching Wyatt prepare these Tsampa balls, there's flies, there's black flies that are buzzing about, and they're causing like a distraction and a bit of a nuisance. And so without even thinking, I reach over and I smack one dead, right? As I'm looking over at Wyatt and he's still talking, and suddenly it was just like, you know, out of the corner of my ear, all the room, the sound just stopped. It was just silence in the room. And so after another second or two, I looked up and started looking around to see the cause of this sudden ceaseness of volume. And I saw all of the compo's faces were directed at me with this very aggrieved expression on their faces. And so then I'm sitting there like wondering, why are they all giving me this stink eye when Wyatt like says over sideways, he's like, you're not supposed to kill anything here. And so then I look back over to this dead fly carcass that's lying on the table next to my bowl of Tsampa, and it hits me right as I start to turn shades of red, and I'm like, oh my God. Like I stand up and I start like doing an apologetic bow. I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry, it won't happen again, sort of thing. And most of the monks don't speak a word of English, but by my penitence, you know, they sort of saw that I was apologetic. And so after a few moments more of that awkward silence, it was just like suddenly the commotion started back, the bantering, the laughter, and breakfast continued on as normal. But I certainly had that imprinted like a tattoo, not to kill anything while I was there, even a fly, right? Especially in front of the monks. And so that was how breakfast went. And then after breakfast, Wyatt invited to show me around the local area, because he had been there for a few months, but he was leaving soon. And so I definitely wanted to find out from him like where things were that I should know about. And so after he went from breakfast and sort of, he did his thing, go back, brush my teeth, all that, then I met him at the gate of the monastery, and then he started showing me for the first time places to go. And the first place that he was going to show me was the town next door, Pharping, where all of these stores are located at and where you can go for groceries and things. And so we skirted along this wall that was catacorner to the monastery where these other big houses were, and we just sort of followed behind this wall that was on the top of a ravine for a little bit until we came onto this opening. Of course, there's no paved roads, everything's dirt and thick, sort of like Georgia red clay looking, with fields all about, and then forest and hills and these mud brick houses, but not many of them. It's sparse. It's a lot of open space, very out in the country. And so we're just walking as we come out from that wall into sort of a place like this that has one road going straight ahead that heads into the little village called Dalu, is what Wyatt told me. And then to the right of it, rising up this sort of prominence, start of this slanty hill, is the dirt road to Pharping. And so Wyatt tells me, over in Dalu, there's a few mom and pop shops, super small, one or two places where you can get, some chicken or some milk tea from if you want outside the monastery. But there's really not much there. It's just like a little residential village where, if you want anything of necessity, you'll probably have to go over to Pharping. And so that's where he was going to show me how to get to now. And so we took that right route, headed up this sort of, I call it a mountain, the Nepalese people call it a hill, and Wyatt and I are just having a conversation for a while about different things and differences between the states and Nepal and this and that, and how the monastery was funded, which was completely by donors, I found out, which was just crazy because of how absolutely expensive and big and huge and gorgeous it was, and that it was housing like 550 monks and students there, feeding them plus the volunteers 3 times a day. It was just really something to consider, that monastery, Adzom, and all of the other monasteries, that's how they're built. They're built from donations and maintained through these donations that come from religious members. And so I asked him if the other monasteries around were as nice as Adzom was, right? And he said not even close, which I found to be the case as well. When I would go and visit other monasteries. None of them came close to being as nice as Adzom was. Adzom was absolutely gorgeous. And so basically we continued following this mountain path, going up higher and higher, starting to sweat, until we passed this whole tribe of rhesus monkeys. There were shrines there, Hindu shrines, Buddhist shrines, and then when we were sort of we got past the aggressive rhesus monkeys, then Wyatt asked me if I wanted to see the top of this mountain. It's called Prayer Mountain, right? Which was like not so much farther up on the way to where we were going to Pharping. So I'm like, yeah, sure, of course, let's go and do it. And so we keep walking up, and then suddenly, as we're coming onto the prominence, it was just an absolute cacophony, a sea of colors, as we walked out from the thick forest onto basically this sort of rocky outcrop summit that was just completely covered in Tibetan prayer flags. The white, blue, the red, the yellow, all of these different colors flapping in the wind, attached to everything that you could attach them to. Trees, it was, you'll see in the picture, just absolutely covered in these prayer flags. And so I was just blown away by this, right? Because the Nepalese people, this is how they are. They're very religious, and they do things like this. And this entire top of the mountain is called Prayer Mountain. You go and put these flags up and you say a prayer, and so it's a very holy sort of place to them, I suppose. But to me, it was just like this absolute, really cool place to see, so colorful and everything. And I was just blown away. And so while we were up there, I asked Wyatt, I was like, do you smoke? And he was like, yeah, which is something that's very curious, because if you ask an American, hey, do you smoke? They know instinctively that you're asking if you smoke weed. But if you ask a foreigner if you smoke, they'll always think that you're asking about tobacco. And so that's just one of the things that you'll see as a world traveler when you come across people, if you happen to smoke, that you'll ask. And another thing is, everybody outside of America, when they do smoke weed, they always mix it with tobacco. They make spliffs, right? So that's another thing to be mindful for, because if you don't like tobacco and then you're out somewhere and you ask to smoke, they will always have weed and tobacco mixed together in the joint. So anyway, just something to keep note of. But Wyatt said that he did, and I had a little bit of the hash that Tsampa had given me, or Sanjay, on the taxi guy that took me from Kathmandu. And so while we were up there on this prayer mountain, We had a bowl of hash sitting there under these blankets of colors, looking out of this gorgeous view, this mountain over top. And Wyatt was telling me, he asked me if I knew why the Buddha was depicted as always being so fat. And I didn't know, so I was, I said, no, I don't know why that is. And he told me that the reason was so that he would no longer be attracted to women, so that he would not lust or have them lust over him, and so he could more easily, carry on with his religious principles and teachings. Well, which was curious because I didn't realize that, and so we hung up there for another half hour or so, just talking and enjoying the absolute gorgeous views before we were ready to go back into civilized society and continue down the trail into Pharping, which was just this little tiny mountain town with a single road between it, and on each side of the road there were like a few shops that had, you could call them sort of like little markets, tiny grocery stores. You wouldn't even call them a grocery store, but they have like a one or two little freezers, where there's some chicken or frozen pork or things like that, and they have the big bags of rice, and they have some candy, and they have bread and some fruits and veggies. So that was really important to see where all that stuff was. And then after an hour or so walking around Pharping, then Wyatt and I started going back towards Adzom, and he showed me the roundabout way to go. So the first time we went over the mountain pass, and then this way we followed the road back, which is where like the buses and everything and all the cars would go until they hit that fork, right? So Sanjay, when we hit the fork, he took a right and went up to Adzom. If you take a left, and eventually you'll go to Pharping. And so that first day I was able to sort of do that circuit, that loop, and then learn a whole lot of the geography and the layout from Wyatt, which was super cool and helpful. And then once we got back, then he actually introduced me to all of the little monks, which was super cool and exciting, and what I will get into in the next video. So please, please, please subscribe, because these are only being done to increase and raise awareness for Miss Ashley Oosthuizen, who is suffering a life sentence in Thai prison, unless we can help get her story known to the world. So please like, subscribe, and share. Everything I do is for her. I love her so, so much. And I appreciate your time and help. We will see you next week for meeting the monks.